As a species, we've been at the forefront when it comes to tools, whether it be utilizing them, designing them, developing them, or building them to make life easier. We became apex predators some 500,000 years ago when we started to use stone-tipped spears, bows, and arrows. Fast forward to the 9th century CE, we developed a formula for gunpowder, which would eventually pave the way to the creation of firearms. That was a rather simplistic way of looking at it, but firearms have been around since the mid-1300s, and we've been consistently improving on them, with each version's next iteration showing marked improvements that make it a more efficient tool for the main purpose it was designed for, to take a life, for better or worse. And yet, even with all of the awe-inspiring models firearms manufacturing companies have been developing and churning out over the last century, there are a handful of gun designs that make it out of the engineer's office and into the production lines, making you wonder who in the executive team greenlighted the production or why the decision to greenlight was made in the first place. Here's our list of the top 5 worst modern production firearms ever made. The Type 94 Nambu pistol. Produced from 1935 to 1945, the Type 94 Nambu pistol was one of, if not the most terrible pistol design to have been adopted for military use. This was the pistol carried by the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Developed by a retired Army veteran, Kajiro Nambu, and some of his associates, the Nambu Type 94 was a semi-automatic pistol chambered in 8x2mm Nambu rounds and was primarily designed as a small and lightweight sidearm for the Japanese Army. Unfortunately, the ballistics of its chambering were as underwhelming as the pistol itself was troublesome. It was awkward to use, difficult to disassemble, and was more dangerous to its operator than it was for its intended target. Back in the days when it was developed, there was no country with enough experience and know-how to build a small sidearm that could be as reliable and as effective as any of the modern production subcompact pistols we know of today. For the Type 94 Nambu pistol, its initial design, which dictated its compactness, was already bad enough. Because of its small frame, the pistol had a small grip, which made it appropriate for most Japanese soldiers as they had relatively small hands. However, it was no Browning high power as the magazine could hold only 6 rounds of 8x2mm Nambu, an old cartridge introduced in Imperial Japan in 1904, with ballistics comparable to some of the warmer 380 ACP loads on the market today, but exhibited poor terminal performance, a common characteristic shared by all slow-moving, small-diameter bullets with a full metal jacket. Even with its relatively demure ballistics, the 8x2mm Nambu cartridge produced chamber pressures that proved a little too much for the bolt, which made it difficult to insert a fresh magazine into the pistol's small grip. The soldier had to use a significant amount of force just to jam the magazine in. And as the magazine catch protruded from the frame, the soldier had to be careful when holstering the pistol to avoid accidentally hitting the magazine catch and prevent the magazine from being ejected out of the handgun. And if these mechanical defects sound bad, they were made worse by the Japanese Ordnance Department interfering with the pistol's production. Standards dwindled as Japan started losing the war, further resulting in already poor workmanship getting even worse. As resources slowly started becoming more and more limited, later Type 94 Nambu pistol models became even more problematic as many of its internal components were originally designed to be small and delicate. Subpar materials and non-existent quality control led to these components easily breaking apart. There was also the problem of accidental discharge. The problem stemmed from the sear bar, which was designed to be mounted on the outside of the pistol. It could be easily actuated if the pistol was unintentionally dropped or handled without extreme care. Stories of the pistol firing when soldiers pretended to surrender while pushing the sear bar are prevalent, so much so that the Type 94 Nambu is jokingly referred to by some as the surrender pistol. The Glicente Model 1910. There are a few guns in history that have the tendency to just fall apart without disassembly. One of which we're including on our list is the Glicente Model 1910. How bad is it? Picture this. Most firearms employ the use of a takedown lever for fast and easy disassembly. But for the Glicente Model 1910, the trigger acts as a secondary takedown lever. Upon pulling it, the gun just disassembles itself fast. Introduced in 1910, the Glisenti Model 1910 was one of the first semi-auto handguns accepted for military service and became somewhat prevalent in the First War, but not so much as during the Second World War, even though it did see some use. Those days, most countries' military were in the process of transitioning from some of their old trusted revolvers chambered in big-bore calibers to smaller, easier-to-carry, but untested semi-automatic handguns with unproven effectiveness in the battlefield. The Glisenti Model 1910 was chambered for a cartridge called the 9mm Glisenti, which was identical to the renowned 9mm Parabellum in dimensions, but was totally different from it in that it had a smaller powder charge, making it a much weaker cartridge as far as ballistics. This is because the handgun it was chambered for couldn't handle the high pressures the 9mm Parabellum was known for. The way it was designed made it so that it lacked the level of durability required to handle any cartridge more powerful than its anemic chambering. As such, loading the Glisenti Model 1910 with 9mm Parabellum rounds resulted in a catastrophic failure. One other questionable feature it also had was its takedown screw, which the engineer for some reason decided to put in the front of the frame, exposing the left side of the gun and allowing for its disassembly. But again, because of the weak structural design it was known for, the lead screw would loosen, often at the worst possible moments, without the operator being aware. This would result in the frame and receiver assembly falling apart randomly. It was a good thing there were many other domestic firearm manufacturing companies Italy could fall back on, ones that had real working knowledge of firearms and the years of experience necessary to build them. Around 24 years after it was adopted, the Italian Army decided to replace their Glisenti Model 1910 with the Bretta M1934, a handgun that was leagues ahead of it. 1917 Showshot light machine gun. Known to many as the Showshot, the Fusil Mitrailleur Model 1915 CSRG was a relatively good weapon before the decision was made to chamber it in the 8mm level. It only received a bad reputation as soldiers who were tasked to use it hated it. To this day, the Showshot is regarded as one of the first assault rifles, which would be correct if not for the fact that it was a light machine gun and should never be looked at as a rifle for any reason. The abbreviation CSRG stood for Showshot, Suter, Rib Royals, and Gladiator, designed by Louis Showshot, Charles Suter, and manufactured by the Gladiator Company under the supervision of the company's general manager, Paul Ribirolles. The 1917 Showshot proved to be an excellent light machine gun during its testing phases, meeting all of the designer's expectations. But there were two main reasons as to why we decided to include it in our list. One was design-related, the other had something to do with its production. Upon its release, the designers decided to chamber the Showshot for what was then the French Army standard issue service cartridge, the 8mm level. Reason being, it would ease ammo supplies in manufacturing. The problem stemmed from the fact that the 8mm cartridge had a rimmed base with a rather large diameter. Cartridges with such a rim design, when stacked on top of each other, form a curved shape as opposed to rimless cartridges that can be stacked straight. Because of this, the designers came up with a semicircular magazine which fed the Showshot through the underside of the breech mechanism. This 20-round magazine had little cutouts on each side which exposed the spring and cartridges. Nobody knew what the designers were thinking when they decided to add those cutouts, but it's safe to assume those were put there for the gunner to be able to check the remaining rounds in the magazine. Unfortunately, those slots caused blockages as mud, dirt, and filth got into the chamber of the firearm while being fired. The production-related problem had to do with the Gladiator Company, though it was no fault of their own. The company was a bicycle manufacturer, but the French government commissioned them anyway to build the Showshot, as they assumed that both bicycles and guns were made from steel tubes, ergo their manufacturing processes weren't going to be too different. The people at Gladiator had zero experience building firearms, which naturally led to the guns they built having reliability issues. After the United States decided to join the Allied forces, France showed their appreciation to American soldiers by building Showshot light machine guns chambered in .30-06 Springfield, the U.S. military standard issue rifle cartridge. Since the Showshots weren't originally designed to handle such a powerful rifle round, the resulting firearms turned out to be much worse than its predecessor. The Bretta Modello .30 light machine gun. Possibly the ugliest, most awkward light machine gun ever made. The 6.5mm Bretta Modello 30 was a light machine gun used by Italian soldiers through World War II, utilizing a form of delayed blowback operation. It was designed to fire from a closed bolt, with the barrel and bolt moving rearward for a short distance before the barrel separated from the bolt, which continued to move backward, feeding a new round as it ejected a spent casing. Firing from a closed bolt meant zero air circulation of any sort, which resulted in heat buildup, one of the disadvantages of adopting such a firing system. In a light machine gun, all that heat buildup would cause the cartridges in the chamber to cook off, which would result in the gun going off even without the trigger being pulled, potentially injuring or killing the gunner or whoever happened to be in front of the gun barrel. Another disadvantage of the closed bolt firing system was that to ensure proper casing extraction, there had to be an integral oil pump to lubricate each cartridge as it was chambered. The Bretta Modello 30 used a fixed 20-round box magazine, which fed it from the right side. It hinged forward so the gunner could reload it with a stripper clip with 26.5mm cartridges. After reloading, it was closed and locked against the receiver. Similar to Showshot, there was a cutout at the top of the magazine that served to allow the gunner to check how many rounds remained, and as with the Showshot, this hole in the magazine served as an entry for sand, dirt, and debris to enter the gun's action. This and the integral oil pump that lubricates the chambered cartridges made cleaning the Bretta Modello 30 a nightmare. Consequently, all the gunk and dirt that gathered in the action resulted in the jamming while being fired. The gyrojet. And finally, we have the gyrojet, a weapon that used a rocket-propelled cartridge which slightly resembled a .45 ACP round. Unlike a typical bullet sitting on top of gunpowder in a brass casing with primer at the bottom, a gyrojet projectile was a single cartridge assembly that contained a primer and a piece of flash paper or cotton that ran the length of the hollow fuel grain. While a conventional bullet is pushed out of the gun's barrel by chamber pressure resulting from gunpowder exploding after being ignited by the primer, the gyrojet uses burning rocket fuel to propel it. This meant that the platform from which the gyrojet was launched could be built much simpler, as its barrel and chamber don't need to withstand the explosions resulting from gunpowder getting burned. Rockets, by their design, can never be as accurate as bullets, so the gyrojet had to be stabilized by its nozzles, which made it spin and helped it reach rotational speeds that were higher than most rifle rounds. At its best, the gyrojet round had twice the kinetic energy of the standard .45 ACP factory loading, but how often it could hit a target with such force is a different thing altogether. The main problem with the gyrojet was its consistency, or lack thereof. As it uses a radically different method of propelling itself, it suffered from almost non-existent accuracy and very limited to minuscule stopping power, thus offering no real advantage over traditional firearms. The company that manufactured it, MB Associates, eventually stopped working further on the project after realizing how bad of a failure it was. And that's our list of the top 5 worst modern production firearms ever made. Like, share, and subscribe, and click on that bell icon so you don't miss out on new content.